Good morning. It is January something. I don't know what date it is, but it's Monday, and I want to begin anew, and try to talk about what's been going on with me. There's been a lot of transformation. It's always a constant process of transformation, and I've been from the start of these videos. It started with talking about Buddhism and consciousness, and to put it very succinctly, Buddhism is simply the raising or expansion of consciousness. So that became very interesting for me, because all my life I felt I've been searching for something. All my life I've been the feeling that as all of us do, it's not just me, that there was something missing. And if you say there's not, then either you're a very special person, or you're just kidding yourself, or you just don't know. You just don't know because you filled yourself with distractions, and you think, and pleasures, and you think that you have a satisfying life when you really don't. So, but if you look deeply, and I'm talking about those of us who can look deeply. If you're living a superficial life based upon self-gratification, you have a lot of money or career, or you're so involved in the role of being a parent, and you're so noble with the noble feelings associated with that, then this is not really, you may not be able to identify with it. But if you look deeply at life and your psychological experience of life, you'll see that there is this feeling of lack, something missing. So my life has been a search for that. And I realized at some point that I had much more intellectual ability than I was conditioned to believe I had. So because of our conditioning and our so-called education, which is a bunch of horse shit as far as I'm concerned, what they teach in schools is bullshit. I didn't realize that till later, and I had to find out the hard way by myself through suffering. And that's the pattern. That's the universal pattern. We don't reach truth until we get in touch with our suffering. And that's also the essence of Buddhism. So go back. Buddhism is expanding the consciousness or awareness. And within that process, we have a sense of lack, a sense of suffering. And we find that in reality, what we're doing to cover that, or avoid that, or bury that, or suppress that, is self-gratification and pleasure. So what that feeling of lack really is, or that suffering, is fear. It's simply fear of non-being. Very basic, very essence, and we all have that, because it's the fear of death, the ultimate fear. And all the other fears derived from that. Social fears, social fear is the other primary one. Lack of being part of, lack of belonging. I mean, you just stop right there. That's a derivative of fear of death or non-being. So social dysfunction, social fears, the fear of not having enough, and not being. Fear of non-being, let's call it that, rather than fear of death, because no one likes to talk about death, of course. So say fear of not being, and that can be extended into all our activities. So now we have the concept of raising consciousness. You call it Buddhism. I love Buddhism, but there's a lot of bullshit in Buddhism too. It's like tricks and techniques and rituals and all this man-made, handed down second-hand and third-hand knowledge, and the guru and the master and the teacher you have to respect. All that mostly is, I mean, it's nice and helpful in early stages, but it turns into just more bullshit because you really don't need any of that to get to the core. It's all here. It's all here, right there for you. You don't need a guru. You don't need a teacher. You don't need a religion. Oh, God forbid. Fuck the religions altogether. So, to be fair, I have to include, although I love Buddhism, I have to include that in religion too. And it's helped me a great deal, and there's a lot of wisdom in that. But religion as a whole is a bunch of man-made garbage. So, raising consciousness, then the awareness, expanding the awareness to realize that life is filled with this type of suffering of non-being, and that we do everything we can to avoid that. Avoid the feeling of that. Avoid the actuality of that in our lives. So then life is filled with this distraction. What we call love, we say this sappy, maudlin bullshit idea of love everybody. That's another one the religions teach us. Turn the other cheek. Love your enemy. All bullshit and nonsense. So even the idea of love itself isn't genuine as we know it, because it's all feeling of pleasure. Feeling of being dependent upon or depending upon, dependency. So what we confuse love with dependency in our relationships. And we have all these expectations about relationships based upon our conditioned past, and our education, and our fear, and our fears of not belonging, not being. So it gets so then the key becomes to recognize fear and how it motivates us, and recognize pleasure for what it is, as an escape from this discomfort of non-being or not having. And this pleasure principle is the principle that from which all our behavior is derived. Whereas, so here we are now. We know that if this is the issue, then what's the answer? The answer is, to begin with, to become aware. That's the goal of Buddhism, and it's also the goal of the psychological sciences and neurosciences today. They're making a neurocognitive map of the brain, and everyone's very interested in what is mind and what is consciousness. Consciousness studies are huge right now in research institutions. So, but all the people, all the ignorant people, little silly people are afraid of that word consciousness. Yeah, it's scary, right? Think of, oh, somebody's talking about consciousness, some special powers, or related to some new age bullshit, clairvoyance, or superpowers, or mind reading, or fortune telling, or some garbage like that. And what's really scary about it, and why people are scared about it, is because it right away it rings a bell, like, oh, consciousness means I have to be conscious of myself. Consciousness means, uh-oh, I have to experience all the shit and conditioning, all the man-made bullshit, ideologies, religions, teachers, gurus, past, parent, family, all that crap. I have to look at it. And consciousness. No one wants to be conscious. In fact, you don't want to be conscious. You'll do anything you can to escape from being conscious, because that's really you. When you become conscious, you really see yourself as you are. As you see things as they are. You see fear as it is. And you can't hide from yourself, and you can see your motivations in yourself clearly of the behavior you do. So consciousness is like, everyone will, because I talk about it, I experiment with it. And the moment you start talking about knowing, we could also call this epistemology. If you want to use some fancy terms, big words, they're worthwhile looking up. Epistemology and ontology, which is, epistemology is knowledge, study of knowledge, or what is knowledge, what is knowing, and what is being, ontology. So knowing and being are the two questions. What is the nature of reality? Knowing. And what is the nature of the self? Being. And that's something you don't want to know. You'd rather just pleasure yourself and distract yourself from it. So, when I say you, I'm not saying me, because me in the present doesn't run from that. But you still do. And I don't know anything, and I'm not a teacher, but I can point you in the direction, in the right direction. I've searched. If there's a definition of scholar, I can fit it at times in my life, and especially now. I was also an alcoholic, and I wasted many years of my life. But I know that by nature, I'm a scholar, and I love studying. So I've searched everything for the answers. And the answer to what? The answer to liberation from the self, and liberation from this type of fear-driven behavior and living, and the suffering that goes along with that, and the selfishness and the greediness and the resentments, always comparing, always judging, because you all do that throughout the day, always comparing and judging, never really listening, always thinking. And what we've found now, what I've found, is it's thinking itself that's the enemy of liberation from fear and suffering. Because thinking is just an expression of conditioning. So thinking is just memory. Thinking is using past experiences to form judgments, or using my expectations of the future to form judgments about situations and people and events in my life. So then we go back to the idea of raising consciousness, or expanding it. So it just simply means knowledge. Knowing, rather. Consciousness means awareness, increased awareness, increased sensitivity. So if you take the old idea of subconscious, the idea in subconscious is that there's some hidden content from our past, right? The idea of consciousness, the idea of subconscious is that we have hidden content that drives us and motivates us. Psychoanalysis and psychotherapy and all that talks about that. And yeah, so use that So we have consciousness, which is when you're awake and you're not dead and you're not in a coma and you're not in a deep dreamless sleep. Can you know anything when you're in those states? Obviously not. Are you aware of anything when you're in those states? Obviously not. You're not aware of anything that we know when you're dead or when you're in a coma, because there's no brain activity. If we hook you up to an MRI, there's no brain activity. You're not knowing anything. So we have the idea of unconscious or not conscious, then conscious when you're awake, and then partial conscious when you're dreaming. And then we have this idea of subconscious, which is all our history and perhaps our untapped genetic memory, not perhaps, definitely, that is in the subconscious. But we normally think of subconscious as our personal history and all the baggage and shit that we carry around, all the opinions that we have, and all the affinities to group associations, ideologies, political associations, even the concept of identity, self-concept, self-esteem, self-doubt, fear, conditioned patterns to environmental stimulus. This is all in the subconscious, and this is why we react. And this is the nature of thought. It comes from subconscious because you don't choose your thoughts. You don't choose your thoughts. You say you have free will. You don't even choose your own thoughts. It's impossible. So how could you have free will if you have no control of your thoughts? And you don't. And you say, yes, I do. Of course I have free will. And you don't. You just don't. You're just ignorant. Because if you do a simple test and you're not afraid of this word consciousness, you're not afraid to look at really the nature of your mind, how feeble it is, you can take 2 minutes and try to clear your mind and empty it of thoughts. And the fact that you won't be able to stop your thoughts means that you have no control of them. And the only time that you do stop this random arising of thoughts, and they're mostly nonsense, imaginings, bullshit of the past or the future, always the past or the future, they're never in the now. The only time that ever stops is when you're focused on a task at work, or you're fucking, or you're engrossed in some sensual pleasure that has your attention, watching a good movie, reading a book. When you're immersed in something and you're focused on it and you're enjoying it, generally, that stream will stop. But if you're reading something that takes a little bit of mental discipline, let's say some type of non-fiction or something that requires concentration, you can see how easily your mind will stray from that. And you have to keep on bringing yourself back or reading the same passage again because you don't have the ability really to focus. Because when you have to use your brain like that, you don't want to reject, you hate that. So you just want pleasure, things that are pleasurable. But if you're getting paid big bucks for it, yeah, then you change yourself to do it, to focus on this business task or whatever it is. Or this work task. Yeah, you're getting the money, so you could go have more pleasure with the money. So there's a big reward to that. But as far as learning itself, looking at the nature of the mind, studying the mind, looking at yourself, consciousness, no. You're not into that. Very few people are. But these can be considered the elite. I'm not saying I'm elite. I'm saying I'm nothing. I'm absolutely no one and nobody. But I'm very happy with that. And I've never been happy. And happy is a stupid word because I don't even want to be happy. I don't care about being happy or being sad. They're all the same at this point. It makes no difference. It's all good. As they say, as some people say, it's all good. It's all good. So, yeah, so back to the thought. So thought is the enemy of this whole process because it's just your conditioning. So in Buddhism and in phenomenology now, which is very big, although we don't use that word, people don't like big words. It scares them. is this process of gaining control of the mind. Gaining control. And I can tell you how, the first steps to do that. Go into it later. I'll just give you the intro to it. But it's when I first started and I was reading Buddhism, it was about this idea of stopping the thoughts, and that's if you try to do it, and I suggest you do, take a minute and try to stop your thoughts, and then notice when they arise, you're not choosing anything. They're arising from somewhere that in a place that you have no control over, your subconscious. So then when we become more conscious, so here's the level of consciousness, like this, a bubble, and this is your brain, this is your mind, rather. So here's what you're aware of. You have this is the size of your consciousness right now, right? So we could put a shape onto it. It's limited because it's very influenced by past experiences. And then there's beneath that, or that's sitting in, what you're conscious of is sitting in this vast ocean of unconscious stuff or subconscious. Much bigger. So the consciousness is within that now. And what you're doing when you're expanding your consciousness is you're revealing more of that subconscious or that darkness. So as consciousness is expanded through training, awareness, more subconscious is revealed, and hence the subconscious content, once it's revealed, we call that insight. And not in the terms of psychoanalytic bullshit, but just the nature of who I am and my motivations and what drives me. So we could leave subconscious is not really important. It's just in passing, mention it. But so the way to grow your consciousness is not by stopping the thoughts. And this is, when I say grow consciousness, I'm saying the meditation part that you could do. It's meditate. It's really what it is meditation. So you could do this anywhere, anytime. It is not to try to stop the thoughts, because you won't be able to. It will be impossible for you to stop your thoughts. At this point, you don't stop anything. You don't do anything. It happens of itself eventually. But so what you do is just watch and observe and experience your thoughts. So let them come and observe them as they come. And that's it. That's the first step. So if you want to get involved in meditation, it doesn't mean sitting like this, sitting in this is nice, but you don't have to do this. I only do this for my yoga. I don't do this for insight meditation. Raising consciousness, we could say insight, gaining insight. So it's insight meditation. These seated postures and all this stuff is more like a body meditation. It's meditation through proprioception, through body awareness. But we're talking about purely, mostly psychological, but it's also the mind too, because you can't separate the two. So there's always a bodily sensation associated with happiness, pleasure, and fear. There's also a body, so we could use the body too, to experience fully those conditions. So when the thought arises, when the emotion arises, you can see, and I'll prove to you that consciousness exists. If you're already still scared of that word, I'll show you. I'll explain it to you simply. Thoughts occur in time, and thoughts must occur in some space, right? Where do your thoughts occur? Outside, floating around in space. Where do they occur? When you have a thought or a feeling, there's a sense that it's internal, right? And the thought feels like it's coming somewhere behind the eyes, back here, behind the eyes and the forehead, you feel like a thought is somewhere really there. And so, and they have a beginning and they have an end. So they must occur in time. Things that have a beginning and an end must occur in time, and they must occur in some place, in some space. And for order for us to know that they have a beginning and an end, we must be able to look at them and see the beginning and see the end. So right there, we have a split, this duality. We have the thoughts on the one side, or the emotion. Let's just use thoughts now. Emotions are the same thing, only they're more of a body response. So we have the thoughts on one side, and we can observe the thoughts beginning. We could observe the duration and what they compose of, and we could observe their end. And we know they're happening in time, and they're happening in this space. Well, what is that space? And if I say we can observe it, or you can observe the thoughts starting and ending and the content and the duration, what is it that's observing that? What is it that's aware of the thoughts? The thoughts are coming and they're going and they're leaving. No trace behind. They're not taking anything away either. When you have a thought and it leaves, is it taking a part of you out, taking a part of you away with it? No, there's something that remains constant. And that's the experiencer. The experiencer, the knower, right? So mysterious. Ooh, ooh, ooh. The experiencer, the knower. And that's being conscious. That's consciousness. And that's what you are. In your pure essence, that's all you are. You're not the thought. You're not the feeling. You actually are. It's better to consider yourself as I am angry, I am hate, I am resentful. It's better, but we don't have to get to that yet. That's the next step. It's a little bit more complex. Right now, it's better to know that there's the knower, the experiencer, and the knower, and then there's the experienced. So let's put that duality there for now. We need the duality now, the two sides, because it helps us to understand. Later, we'll bring them back together into a unity, but duality for now is important as a learning tool. So I'm going to wrap this up very quickly. So just so you're stuck, I want you to think about the experiencer as, or the observer as consciousness that can observe the thoughts and experiences, the hate and resentment and jealousy and comparing and judgments and thoughts, because these are all thoughts. They're all thoughts. So we say thought is the enemy of, let's call it liberation. I mean, there's other words we can use, but that's a nice word. Liberation from suffering. Liberation from thoughts. Being a slave to thoughts. So your thoughts, really, you have no control of them. No, you don't. Try. You won't have any control. They think you. And then consciousness, this just aware presence, is diminished to a finite, limited thought or emotion. This vast, empty space of knowing, awareness, because that's what it is. It's limitless. You can't define it by any means. You can't know anything without it. Right? So it knows everything. Consciousness, awareness, knows everything. Everything that passes through it, it's aware of. Unless you're living like an animal with sensual pleasure and just you're living in your unconsciously. You're living just from reaction to reaction to the environment. Thoughtless, mindless, callous, ignorant. That's what we call ignorant. Someone who's not conscious of their behaviors. They're just responding to the environment and taking as much as they can, and insensitive and greedy and this is ignorance. But most of us aren't that ignorant. So there is some element of observing the self, and oh, I did something wrong, or I said something wrong, or that might not be fair, or that might be this or that. So be aware of being aware. Listen. So ask yourself, am I aware? Or if I asked you, are you aware? And you think about it for a minute, you'd be like, yes. So the space between the question, are you aware, and the answer, yes, is a gap. There's a space where you're just looking inward. And you say, yes, okay, I'm aware. Like if someone says, are you paying attention? Focus your attention. Are you aware? The space between the question and the answer, in that gap, is a little moment of consciousness. So the idea is to spread that moment until eventually that's all there is. And that's a state of bliss. That's the ultimate goal, or one of them. So learn to divide right now, separate the experiencer from the experienced, the knower from the known, and the experiences being your thoughts and emotions, and greed, and resentment, and jealousy, and envy, and comparing, and judgments. Whenever you make a judgment, generally thoughts evidence themselves in our judgments about the world, and you never stop judging. So you never stop judging, so there's a lot of content there. So you're just observing what takes place. And that's the first step. And the rest we can go on to at another time. Okay, bye.